As you can see, I'm not in the Geoblog studio today. I'm actually down at the beach. But which beach am I at? Well, I'm at St Kilda Beach in Melbourne, Australia. So if you've been following me, you know I did a couple of live streams live on the plane. I'm now in Melbourne and I'm enjoying this beach. You can see the beach is pretty empty behind me. I don't know why, because it's not that early in the morning. It's probably around about 10:30, 11 o'clock. The reason I wanted to make this video is really to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, because when I first started posting videos about Ukraine, I actually did a comparison to what happened in Chechnya back in the 1990s. And Chechnya was formerly part of the Soviet Union. Russia wasn't very happy that it was getting its independence. And so when it declared independence in 1991, there wasn't much support for it in Russia. And then in 1994, Boris Yeltsin decided to invade, to basically bring it back into the Russian Empire, so to speak. And that war went on for a couple of years, but Russia didn't really commit to it, and it ended in 1996, and Chechnya still declared its independence. However, when Vladimir Putin took over power in Russia, he decided to ramp things up. So in 1999, Russia went back into Chechnya in force. They really did a complete version of Ukraine on Chechnya. Now that war lasted for somewhere between 9 and 10 years. It didn't officially end until 2009. And at the time when I started making these videos, I said that there was comparables to Ukraine and that there was no reason why there would ever be an end to the war in Ukraine, and it could go on for as long as the one in Chechnya. Now, I remember at the time getting lots and lots of messages from people saying, "You're being ridiculous, it's nothing like Chechnya, the Ukraine war will be over in a matter of months." But here we are 4 years later, and the war is still raging. We don't really have any definitive end in sight. So could it go on for 10 years in the same way as the war in Chechnya did? Well, if we look at it from Russia's point of view, the reason why the war in Chechnya ended was because Russia basically declared it over. They said that the insurgence was ended and that Chechnya was now officially part of Russia. And it's never been deemed to be independent by any other country, so we don't have Chechnya recognized by NATO or anybody like that. So from Russia's perspective, they got exactly what they wanted. They never yielded. Vladimir Putin basically said, well, we'll just keep going until Chechnya becomes part of Russia. And that's pretty much his approach with regards to Ukraine. So I don't think Russia is going to concede anything. Vladimir Putin has said that he's interested in talking about the war coming to an end, but only on Russia's terms, only if Russia are happy with the proposed deal. Now, Donald Trump has tried to put that deal together. Since he came into power, he's been trying to get Ukraine to agree to basically concede all of the land that Russia is currently occupying. And that's really the bone of contention and the sticking point, because Ukraine doesn't want to give over all of those 4 territories that Russia's currently occupying, but Russia is never going to withdraw its troops. You know, it will fight to the death. So it's a rock and a hard place from Ukraine's perspective. Do you bring an end to the war by saying, okay, you can have what you've taken and we'll just call it quits, and basically the whole last 4 years was a bit of a waste of time? Or do you continue fighting on? But the problem is that from Russia's perspective, they're just never going to give up. So the European countries that have been supporting Ukraine obviously have put a lot of money and manpower behind Ukraine, and that's going to continue. Prior to Donald Trump taking over, Joe Biden was very supportive of Ukraine. I think Donald Trump has sort of wavered backwards and forwards. Sometimes he's been quite negative towards Ukraine, sort of saying that Europe needs to step up and put in more money and manpower, and that the US has basically been putting more than its fair share into it. And then at other times, he's been sort of indicating that Ukraine should basically push back against Russia and that Russia isn't going to win. But overall, I would say that Donald Trump is less supportive of what's happening in Ukraine than the previous administration. And that's really going to have a big influence on what happens in the war, because if the US is not as supportive, if it doesn't provide as much in the way of funding and military support, then it will be more difficult for Ukraine to keep pushing back. I'm sure European powers will step up. But ultimately, is Ukraine going to be able to remove Russia's troops from the 4 regions that it's occupied? Well, given the evidence of what's happening, it looks unlikely. I don't think Ukraine is going to be able to regain that land through military purposes. And Russia is never going to concede it from a political perspective whilst Vladimir Putin is in power. So it's a really difficult situation. And I wanted to make this video really just to highlight the fact that Russia has form here. In Chechnya, it never gave up. And Chechnya is tiny compared to Ukraine. So it's got a population of around about 1.3 million people. It's estimated that in that war, somewhere between 80 and 160,000 people died, which was actually, in percentage terms, a lot higher when you look at the population of Ukraine. Ukraine, before the war started, had a population of around 44 million. It's gone down quite a lot because a lot of people have left the country, obviously. But it's significantly bigger both in land mass and population. So from that perspective, it's a lot more attractive from Russia's point of view. There's a lot more to gain. It's also got more resources than Chechnya had. Chechnya was more of a political decision. Russia wanted it to be part of Russia. Ukraine, it's a similar story, but it's more to do, from Russia's perspective, their angle is that the people in Ukraine are Russian and therefore they want to bring them back into Russia. But also, when you look at the geography of the situation, there are a lot of interesting minerals and resources, and lots of food is grown in the areas in Ukraine that has been taken over. So there's actually some value to be added from Russia's perspective. So I don't think Russia is ever going to give up. This is one of the things that Vladimir Putin likes to do. He sort of gets locked onto something and then he never changes his mind. That's his sort of philosophy, is that, he doesn't suddenly do a U-turn and decide that he's going to do something different to what he said he'd do at the outset. So I don't think Russia will ever pull out of the areas that they've occupied. So Ukraine then have a very difficult decision to make. Do they keep fighting forever? Do they keep the war going, keep losing people, keep having to talk about the war and not be able to move forward with their economy and everything else that you'd want for any country? Or do they concede and let Russia take what they've grabbed? It's a really difficult decision. I don't know what you would do if you were running Ukraine at the moment. It's easy to say that Ukraine needs to fight back and Russia are the bullies and you should never back down to bullies and all of those sorts of things. But the reality of the situation is that people are dying on a daily basis on both sides. So Russia are losing people as well as Ukraine. But this has become a really terrible situation. And sometimes in these wars, you have to just come up with a compromise. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to get Ukraine to agree to. He wants them to basically sign over the land that Russia is occupying. Clearly, from a sort of political perspective, you wouldn't want to do that. It's not something you'd ever want to just say, okay, we'll sign a treaty and let you have what you've taken. But the reality is that there's not really many options from Ukraine's point of view. And I'm trying to be as neutral as possible with these videos. So I don't favor one side or the other. When you look at what's happened, then clearly it looks like Russia's the aggressor, obviously, and that they've come in and really upset the apple cart and that they shouldn't have done that. But you have to say the whole, we are where we are philosophy of, okay, it's happened. What's the best way forward from here? And it's easy, I think, to look back at World War II and say, if we'd have taken that approach when Hitler started invading countries in Europe, then, the Nazis could have won, that, everybody should stand up against the aggressor and push them back and destroy them. But unfortunately, from Ukraine's point of view, that isn't the situation here. We haven't got a united front against Russia. The USA and Europe are not fighting Russia. It's only Ukraine in that battle. They're supporting them. They're helping them financially and from a military perspective, but they don't have any boots on the ground. This isn't a war that NATO is fighting. Ukraine would love it if they were part of NATO and they could get all of those forces against Russia. But if that was to happen, then we'd be looking at essentially World War III, because it would be the same as what we had in World War II. It'd just be Russia replacing Nazi Germany. So it's a really difficult situation. I wanted to post this video because when you come down to the beach and spend a bit of time relaxing and having a bit more time to think about things, you can take a step back. And rather than just talking about what's happening on a daily basis or a weekly basis, just think, what's going on here? Why have we had a war for 4 years? And how is ever going to end? And I think the answer to that is the only way that this war will come to a conclusion is if Ukraine agrees to compromise, because it's unlikely that any other nation is going to be drawn into the fight. So they're on their own. And against Russia, well, Russia have a lot of resources. And even though I've talked a lot about Russia's economy and the problems that are going on there and the fact that they have this huge deficit, so it is causing Russia major problems, they do have large reserves of gold. They're selling that gold. Unfortunately, gold is at an all-time high now. It's heading towards $5,000 per ounce, which is, unbelievable. So that's actually helping Russia because it means that they've got more money. But as they sell gold, it's bringing in more cash. So it's helping to fund some of that deficit. It won't go on forever. It's impossible to keep spending your savings. But Russia has, tens of years of savings of gold. Even if it sold all of its gold, to keep funding the war, it's going to run for decades. So unfortunately, from Ukraine's point of view, that means that the war does have the possibility of going on for many, many more years yet. So I wanted to post this video really just to have a chat about this, just to talk about things in a slightly different way. I'm not trying to be negative with regards to Ukraine, so I'm not pro-Russia on this. I'm not trying to say Russia's won, but the reality of the situation is that they're going to be very difficult to dislodge from all of those areas that they're occupying, and they're never, ever going to give up. So hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion. It might not be as positive as some of the others. If you're a Ukrainian supporter, I'm not looking to be too negative, but I just wanted to really just take a step back and talk about what's happened, talk about Chechnya, and also just to share with you where I am, because I think it's a nice part of the world. And hopefully one day you might get yourself down here. Quite a nice stroll. Hopefully you've enjoyed joining me on this stroll. If you have done, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget I'm currently running my competition whereby you can win my house located close to one of the best beaches in the UK. So have a look at that if you're interested. It's a bit of a fun way of supporting the channel. Thank you so much to everyone supporting me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. Really appreciate it. And here's something to put a smile on your face.